I watched all 151 episodes of The Mentalist, and this is the entire story of Patrick Jane. Patrick Jane's story really starts on the carnival circuit, which is as rough a childhood as you can imagine. Forget schools or stability, because his education came from a con artist father, Alex Jane. Imagine being a kid, and instead of being told bedtime stories, you're told how to cold read strangers and squeeze money from desperate people. That was Patrick's normal. Alex paraded him around like a show pony, cashing in on his insane observational skills while pocketing most of the profits. And it wasn't some fun circus childhood, because it was abuse. Alex knew damn well his son wasn't psychic, but he exploited the act anyway, and Patrick got trapped in it. One flashback even shows teenage Jane refusing to scam a dying girl, only for Alex to threaten him until he gave in.
You're a loser, and you can't just back out when you feel like it, when it's morally convenient.
That's the kind of moral bending that defined his early years. Survival meant lying. And when you grow up like that, you learn to read people, not because you want to, but because you have to. The irony is, those same manipulative tricks and scams his dad forced on him later became the skills that made Jane legendary at the CBI. Somewhere in that mess of carnival life, Patrick actually stumbled into the one piece of genuine happiness he'd ever have, and that's Angela Ruskin. She wasn't just another performer, she was his way out. Both of them knew that living as carny kids meant you either stayed trapped in that cycle forever, or you broke out hard, and together, they chose the second option. Angela was the anchor that pulled him out of his father's grip, and soon enough, they built something that almost looked normal. They had Charlotte, their daughter, and for a little while, Jane got to play the role of husband and father instead of psychic wonder boy. But here's the catch, he didn't really leave the scam behind. Instead of cold reading strangers in a tent, he was doing it on TV, in suits and makeup, calling himself a psychic celebrity. Angela begged him to quit, to leave that world behind, but Patrick's ego wouldn't let him. He had tasted fame, money, and validation, which was the opposite of his humiliating childhood, and he wasn't going back. So while on the surface, he'd escaped the carnival, in reality, he just traded the dusty lot for studio lights, doubling down on the same lie that would end up costing him everything. Patrick's psychic era is one of those chapters that feels almost surreal when you look back on it, because you can see all the cracks forming before the collapse. He wasn't just some guy doing county fairs anymore, he was on TV shows, book covers, living the Malibu lifestyle, strutting around like he was untouchable. The charm was there, sure, but so was the arrogance. Jane had this smug confidence that made him magnetic, but also blind to how reckless he'd become. He could walk into a studio, pull off a cold read so flawless that people swore he was the real deal, and then go home counting cash that was basically made off people's grief. And he loved it. That's the ugly truth. He loved the fame, the money, the ego trip of being the smartest guy in the room. Jane was too addicted to that high to stop. This was the era where Patrick thought he had it all. A family, success, and a reputation. But really, he was building a house of cards, and all it took was few sentences to Red John to send it crashing down. And then came the night that changed everything. One stupid, arrogant moment on live TV. Patrick sat there smirking and called Red John an ugly, tormented little man.
He's an ugly, tormented little man. A lonely soul.
He thought it was just another performance, another way to flex his superiority. But this wasn't some random guest to embarrass. This was Red John, a serial killer who thrived on control. That one insult was the spark that set fire to Jane's entire life. When he walked into his home and found the blooded smiley painted on the wall, his wife and daughter gone in the most brutal way imaginable, it wasn't just grief that he felt. He also felt guilt, because he knew he had handed Red John the weapon by opening his mouth. That's what makes this moment so haunting. Jane didn't just lose his family, he lost everything. All the confidence, the bravado, the ego, it collapsed overnight. The man who thought he could play God realized he was just a pawn in someone else's game. From that day forward, Patrick Jane wasn't a psychic or a celebrity, or even really a husband and father anymore. He was a broken man with one single purpose: to make Red John pay. Everything after this moment is colored by that loss. His entire story becomes about revenge, no matter how much he tries to dress it up as justice. After the murders, Patrick completely shattered. People like to romanticize resilience, but the truth is, Jane didn't bounce back, he just broke. He had a full mental collapse and ended up in a psychiatric ward for months. Think about that. The man who later outsmarts everyone, the guy with the razor-sharp wit and constant smirk, spent so much time behind locked doors because his mind couldn't take the weight of what happened. And honestly, who could blame him? He walked in on the most horrific scene imaginable and carried the knowledge that his own arrogance lit the fuse. That's not something you just push through. Dr. Sophie Miller worked with him during that time, and Patrick later admitted she gave him his life back, but you can tell he never really forgave himself. He also did everything possible to keep that breakdown out of his records, because Jane lives off control, and the idea of being seen as broken terrified him. What's wild is that even Lisbon, who eventually knew every corner of his soul, only learned the full truth much later. The ward wasn't just a detour for him, it was the point where Patrick realized he couldn't keep living as the man he used to be. When Patrick finally clawed his way out of the ward, he had no home, no family, no career, just rage and an obsession with Red John. That's when he walked into the California Bureau of Investigation, basically begging for access to the case file. And here's where his life shifted again. Instead of giving him sympathy, Lisbon and her team gave him something far more useful: purpose. On day one, Patrick pulled off a read so sharp it cracked a murder case wide open, and suddenly, the man who had lost everything had a way to channel his pain. Virgil Manelli, the CBI director, offered him a consultant gig. Of course, Jane didn't exactly play by the rules, like he mocked protocol, hijacked interviews, and treated crime scenes like improv stages. But damn if he wasn't effective. What Lisbon realized early on, and what everyone else had to accept, is that Jane's tricks worked. He wasn't a cop, he wasn't even really stable, but he could see what no one else saw. And for Patrick, it was a win-win. He got to feel useful again while keeping himself close to the only thing that mattered, and that's Red John. The thing about Jane at the CBI is that while he looked like he was solving murders for justice, underneath it was always about Red John. That obsession bled into everything. He kept notebooks full of suspects, built entire memory palaces in his head just to store names, and every case felt like a side quest unless it pointed him closer to the man he hated, and it made him reckless. For all his charm and jokes, Jane was willing to cross lines the rest of the team wouldn't even step near. He tricked suspects into confessions, humiliated powerful people, even dangled lives as bait if it meant getting closer to his endgame. What's dark is that Red John knew it. He fed off Jane's obsession, leaving little breadcrumbs just to keep him hooked. And it worked. He became this paradox where he's brilliant at solving crimes, yet spiraling in his private war. Even his colleagues saw it. Wainwright once flat out called him a clinical psychopath. And honestly, in those moments, you believe it. Jane's obsession wasn't noble. It was toxic, selfish, and dangerous, but it was also what kept him breathing. Without Red John, Patrick Jane wasn't sure he had a reason to exist. Patrick's obsession didn't just burn him, because unfortunately, it burned everyone around him. One of the clearest examples was the Bosco arc. Samuel Bosco was an agent who, for a brief moment, had control of the Red John case. He was tough, by the book, and wanted Jane nowhere near it. But Patrick being Patrick, he couldn't stay out. He meddled, he pushed, and it created friction. Then came Rebecca Anderson, Bosco's assistant, secretly one of Red John's disciples. She slaughtered Bosco and his entire team, and when Jane learned why, it was brutal.
I got rid of Bosco and his team so that you could have the case back. Red John misses you.
She did it because Red John wanted the case back in Patrick's hands. Let that sink in. People died, and I'm talking good agents with families, because Red John thought it would make Jane happy. That twisted gift says everything about the cat and mouse game between them. Red John wasn't just tormenting Patrick, he was shaping him, pulling him deeper into the obsession. And for Jane, that guilt stacked on top of everything else. You can see it in how he tries to act unaffected, cracking jokes, sipping tea, but underneath, the man is drowning in responsibility. Every death tied to Red John felt like it had Jane's fingerprints on it, even if he wasn't holding the knife. It's collateral damage, and it haunted him just as much as his family's murder. And then, the Timothy Carter moment is one of the most chilling turning points in the entire series. Picture this: Jane sitting in a mall food court, sipping tea, when Lisbon dials the phone of a Red John accomplice. Some random average-looking guy at another table answers, and suddenly, Jane is face to face with the monster he's been chasing for years. Or at least that's what he thought. Carter casually drops details about Angela and Charlotte, things only Red John could know.
She smelled like coal tar soap and lavender. Your daughter smelled like sweat. And strawberries and cream.
It pushes Jane past the point of no return. He pulls out a gun, shoots Carter multiple times in cold blood, and calmly sits back down to finish his tea while people scream around him. That scene was so raw it didn't even feel like fiction. For a moment he believed he'd won, that his nightmare was over. But of course it wasn't. Carter wasn't Red John, just another pawn. Jane ended up arrested, tried, and with his tricks he managed to get out, but the damage was done. From that point on, you could see the shift. He wasn't just hunting Red John anymore, he was proving to himself that he could pull the trigger when it counted, no matter the cost. And there is this one episode that changes a lot. I even made an in-depth video about it, so go check it out after this one. But yeah, I'm talking about James Panzer, a so-called true crime blogger obsessed with his own fame. Panzer was secretly the San Joaquin killer, a serial murderer hiding in plain sight. When Jane confronted him, you could tell it rattled him a little, because Panzer wasn't some random thug. He was articulate, manipulative, and dangerously proud of his work. In fact, Panzer almost walked free because Jane couldn't nail him with hard evidence. And here's where it gets twisted. Jane didn't beat him in court or interrogation, he beat him by ego. Patrick manipulated him on live TV until Panzer couldn't resist and mock Red John. He belittled him, painted him as sloppy and past his prime, which was a huge mistake. Red John doesn't take insults lightly, and sure enough, Panzer turned up dead not long after. Jane knew exactly what happened. Red John killed Panzer as a message. Red John is back. But everyone thought Patrick had killed Red John when he shot Timothy Carter in that mall. And for a brief moment, Jane even let himself believe it was over. But when the truth surfaced that Carter was just another pawn, it dragged Jane right back into the obsession, sharper and more relentless than before. After killing Timothy Carter and realizing Red John was still alive, he spiraled while faking a complete breakdown, burning his bridges, and even walking away from the CBI for a while. That's when Lorelei Martins came into his life. Lorelei Martins is one of the darkest and most complicated chapters in Jane's story. She wasn't just another disciple of Red John, she was a weapon he used to blur the line between obsession and temptation. Red John gifted Lorelei to Patrick, knowing exactly how dangerous that would be. She was smart, magnetic, and conflicted, torn between her loyalty to Red John and her strange connection to Jane. Their dynamic was so layered, half seduction, half manipulation, and Jane, instead of shutting her out, drew her closer. He broke her out of prison, used her for information, and in doing so, crossed his own moral lines. What makes Lorelei's story even darker is the revelation about her sister. Red John had, well, YouTube won't let me say it, but assaulted and murdered her, and that trauma is what bound Lorelei to him in this twisted relationship of power and dependency. For Jane, learning this wasn't just horrifying, it was rather clarifying. It showed how deep Red John's cruelty went and how he manufactured loyalty through absolute terror. And yet Patrick still tried to use Lorelei as leverage, playing the same manipulative games he despised in his enemy. Eventually, Lorelei saw the truth, that she was just a pawn between two men, and when she tried to break free, Red John silenced her for good. Her death wasn't just another loss, it was proof that Jane's war consumed everyone it touched. Lorelei's arc was a mirror held up to Jane, forcing him to confront just how close he was to becoming the very thing he hunted. By the time we hit the later seasons, Red John wasn't just a name anymore. He became an institution. Jane finally narrowed his hunt down to 7 suspects, a list he guarded like treasure. On that paper were powerful men tied into the Blake Association, a secret society that worked like Red John's safety net inside law enforcement and politics. Suddenly, this wasn't just about one serial killer, it was about corruption that stretched everywhere. That's where guys like Bertram and Kirkland come in, men with influence who were either suspects or players in the game. And in the middle of all this chaos stood Brett Stiles, the leader of Visualize, playing his usual role of cryptic guru. Stiles always walked this line where you couldn't tell if he was helping Jane or laughing at him. He dropped lines about Red John like he was talking about the weather, hinting at knowledge that no one else could get close to. Jane hated needing him, but at times he did. If you'd like me to make a separate video about Brett Stiles and Visualize, drop a comment below. This whole Blake Association arc showed just how deep Red John's claws really were. Jane wasn't just fighting a killer anymore, he was fighting an entire system built to protect him, and it pushed Patrick further into desperation, because when you realize the monster you're chasing is backed by a network, the game suddenly feels impossible. And everything led to that moment where Jane gathered the 7 suspects, locking them in the same room during Fire and Brimstone. It was his way of flexing control, forcing the game into the open. By then, the hunt had consumed him so much that you could see he didn't care about the collateral anymore. This was his stage, his final act. Among those men was Sheriff Thomas McAllister, who seemed almost laughably ordinary, a small-town cop, but that was the genius of it. Red John wasn't some larger-than-life figure, he was hiding in plain sight the whole time, using the Blake Association to cover his tracks. When Jane finally cornered him in the episode Red John, the reveal wasn't dramatic fireworks. It was intimate, personal, almost grotesquely quiet. McAllister tried to talk, but Patrick didn't give him the satisfaction. He shot him, choked him, and ended the nightmare with his bare hands. No ceremony, no smug one-liners or anything, just raw vengeance years in the making. And the haunting part? Once it was done, Jane didn't look triumphant. He just called Teresa and told her, "It's done."
It's done.
The monster was gone, but so was the obsession that had defined Patrick's entire existence. And that left a question: who was Patrick Jane, if not the man hunting Red John? After killing Red John, Jane disappeared for 2 years into South America. No plans, no cases, just a ghost living on beaches. But he wasn't healing. I'd say he was experiencing avoidance, because without Red John, he didn't know who he was anymore. Eventually, the FBI tracked him down, and instead of running, Jane made a deal. Dropped the charges if he came back to work for them. That's how he found himself with a new badge to play against. With Abbott running the show, Cho promoted, Teresa back in the picture, and fresh faces like Wiley and Vega. It was the same old Patrick, smirking, manipulative, always 3 steps ahead, but this time, without the shadow of Red John. And we finally get to the moment where Jane dropped the mask and told Lisbon he loved her, right there on that plane.
I can't imagine waking up knowing that I won't see you I love you.
That confession wasn't just romance, it was literally Patrick finally admitting he wanted a future, not just revenge. From then on, their relationship shifted into something steady and real. In season 7, we see them as partners in every sense, like still solving cases, still bickering, but now with that underlying warmth that had always been there, just unspoken. And it built toward the episode White Orchids, the series finale, where Jane and Lisbon got married in a simple but beautiful ceremony. The man who once lived in an attic at the CBI haunted by ghosts was now standing in the open air, marrying the one person who never gave up on him. And that final reveal, that Lisbon was pregnant, gave Jane something he never thought he'd have again, a family and a second chance at happiness. It was a quiet, almost poetic ending. No tricks, no elaborate scheme, just peace. And after years of pain, Patrick Jane finally stepped out of the shadow of Red John and into a life he chose for himself. The Mentalist could have been just another procedural, but for me, Jane is not just one of the best written characters in the genre. He's proof that even in a formula show, you can build a story about loss, redemption, and the messy way people heal. And that's why The Mentalist stands out as one of the best procedurals ever made. Thank you for watching, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.